Stop. Just stop for a moment. Take one breath. And before you scroll away, ask yourself something honestly. What if the life you keep waiting for isn't somewhere far ahead of you? What if you've already reached the moment where everything can begin to change? You may have felt it lately. A strange restlessness. Old relationships suddenly feeling different. Things you once wanted no longer giving you the same feeling. Plans changing for reasons you couldn't understand. Doors closing even when you thought you were finally ready to walk through them. And maybe you've been asking, why is everything changing? Here's what I want you to consider. Maybe everything isn't falling apart. Maybe you're standing at a threshold. Because sometimes your life becomes uncomfortable right before your direction becomes clear. You call it confusion. You call it bad timing. You call it losing people. But what if it is something else? What if the version of you that created your old reality can no longer carry you into the next one? Think about that for a second. You don't need to become someone completely different. You need to stop choosing from the identity you've already outgrown. That's where the idea of shifting timelines begins. Not with some magical button. Not with pretending that reality doesn't exist. And definitely not with ignoring the problems in your life. It begins with a decision. A decision so small that nobody else may notice it. But you will. The moment you stop saying, "This is just who I am," and start asking, "Who am I becoming?" That question changes the direction of your attention. And your attention changes what you notice. What you notice changes what you choose. And what you choose, again and again, begins to build a different life. That's the part most people miss. They keep waiting for their future to arrive while repeating the same choices that created their present. They want a new timeline, but they keep using the old map. You cannot walk into a new chapter while constantly rereading the last one. And maybe that's why this message found you at this exact moment. Not because you were chosen above everyone else, but because something inside you is finally ready to pay attention. You may already know what needs to change. You know the conversation you've been avoiding. You know the habit that keeps pulling you backward. You know the person, place, or pattern you keep returning to even though something inside you has already moved on. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. Your next chapter may require you to disappoint the version of yourself that was desperate to keep everything familiar. Because familiar does not always mean right. Sometimes familiar is simply familiar. A closed door can feel like rejection when you're standing outside it. Until you realize it was protecting you from walking into the wrong room. And that changes the question. Instead of asking, "Why did this happen to me?" you begin asking, "What is this making room for?" That question creates space. Space for a different decision, a different response, a different direction. And once you begin responding differently, your reality begins to look different, not because the universe suddenly obeyed a secret command, but because you stopped being the same person inside the same patterns. Remember this line. Your next life begins the moment your old choices stop controlling your next decision. Don't rush past that. Let it sit for a moment. It is about becoming conscious of where you're sending it. Right now, you are standing between what you have known and what you have not yet experienced. That space can feel empty. It can feel scary. It can even feel like nothing is happening. But sometimes the quietest moment is the moment before the biggest decision. And there is one thing you need to understand before we go any deeper. You cannot shift into a future you secretly believe you don't deserve. You cannot keep telling yourself that better things are impossible while expecting yourself to recognize them when they arrive. So breathe, slow down, and look at your life without judging it. Not as a failure. Not as a punishment. Not as proof that you're behind. Look at it as information. Every ending tells you something. Every repeated pattern tells you something. Every uncomfortable feeling is asking you to look closer. And perhaps the most important signal is the one you've been trying to silence. That quiet feeling telling you, there has to be more than this. Maybe there is. But now comes the real question. What if the timeline you want is not waiting for you to become perfect? What if it is waiting for you to become honest? Because once you're honest about what you want, what you're afraid of, what you're tired of, and what you're no longer willing to accept, you can finally make a choice from where you're going instead of where you've been. And that's where this gets deeper. Because the first timeline you need to shift isn't outside of you. It's the one you've been repeating inside your own mind. And once you see how that timeline is being created, you may never look at your choices the same way again. There is a moment when you realize that your biggest limitation was never the world around you. It was the story you kept repeating about yourself. And maybe you have been living inside that story for years. I'm always unlucky. People always leave. I never get the opportunity. I always mess things up. I'll start when I'm ready. Those sentences may sound harmless, but every time you repeat them, you strengthen the identity behind them. And an identity quietly shapes your decisions. If you believe you're unlucky, you may stop taking chances. If you believe people always leave, you may push them away before they get close. If you believe you're not ready, you may keep waiting while opportunities pass. That's the hidden timeline, not a magical alternate universe, but the path created by thousands of tiny choices that come from what you believe is possible for you. And here's the strange part. You may not even notice you're choosing it. Your mind loves familiar patterns, even painful patterns, because familiar feels safer than unknown. That's why someone can complain about the same situation for years and still resist the exact change that could move them forward. The problem isn't always that you don't know what to do. Sometimes, you know exactly what to do. You're just afraid of who you'll become after you do it. Think about the door you've been standing in front of. Maybe you've been waiting for permission, waiting for confidence, waiting for the perfect sign, waiting until fear disappears. But fear doesn't always disappear before the decision. Sometimes confidence appears because you finally make the decision. That's the reversal. You don't always feel ready and then move. Sometimes you move and then become ready. This is where your timeline begins to bend in a practical sense. One choice, then another, then another. You wake up differently. You speak differently. You stop chasing what keeps rejecting you. You stop explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. You stop treating every setback as evidence that you're failing. And slowly, the world around you starts responding to a different version of you. Not because reality has become a fantasy, but because your behavior has changed. Your standards have changed. Your attention has changed. Your actions have changed. And those changes create consequences. That's why the shift can feel almost invisible at first. There may be no dramatic explosion, no glowing portal opening in your room, no sudden announcement telling you that your new life has begun. Instead, you simply don't send the message you would have sent before. You walk away from something you would have begged to keep. You apply for the opportunity you would normally avoid. You finally begin the project you've been postponing. You say no without writing a 10-minute explanation. You realize you're not reacting to your old life anymore. You're responding to your future. That's the moment everything starts becoming interesting. Because when you stop feeding an old pattern, the old pattern starts losing power. And when that happens, something unexpected can occur. You may feel uncomfortable. You may even feel like you're doing something wrong. Why? Because your nervous system can mistake unfamiliar for dangerous. The old version of you knew exactly how to survive in the old pattern. The new version doesn't have a map yet. So your mind says, go back. Go back to the familiar relationship. Go back to the familiar excuse. Go back to the familiar fear. Go back to what you already know. But listen carefully. That feeling doesn't necessarily mean you're on the wrong path. Sometimes it simply means you're no longer walking the old one. And this is where most people turn around. They mistake discomfort for a warning. They don't realize discomfort can also be evidence that something is changing. So when the old identity starts pulling you backward, pause, breathe, ask yourself one question. Is this decision coming from who I am becoming or from who I used to be? Don't answer quickly. Really think about it, because that single question can interrupt an entire pattern. And here's the part nobody can do for you. No video can make the decision on your behalf. No affirmation can replace action. No beautiful idea can build the life you want if you keep making choices that contradict it. You have to participate. You have to choose. You have to move. Even if the step is small. Especially if the step is small. Because your future is not built only through giant moments. It is built through ordinary moments that you repeat. The way you spend the first hour of your day. The things you consume. The people you give your attention to. The promises you keep to yourself. The boundaries you protect. The thoughts you challenge instead of automatically believing. These are the invisible threads connecting your present to your future. And once you understand that, you stop waiting for a miracle. You start becoming the cause. You stop asking, when will my life change? And begin asking, what can I change today? That's a much more powerful question. Because now you have something you can control. Maybe you cannot control who stays, but you can control what you accept. Maybe you cannot control what happened yesterday, but you can control what you repeat tomorrow. Maybe you cannot control every door that closes, but you can decide which doors you stop knocking on. And perhaps that's the real timeline shift. Not escaping reality, but finally taking responsibility for the direction you're giving it. Because the moment you understand that, the future stops looking like something that happens to you. It starts looking like something you are participating in. And there's still one deeper layer. Because changing your choices is powerful. But changing the emotional state behind those choices is where the real battle begins. And that's where we're going next. Stop for a second, because this is where most people get stuck. They change the outside, but they never change the inside. They change their routine. They change their goals. They change their environment. But deep down, they still expect the same ending. And if you expect the same ending, you will often make choices that lead you back there. Think about it. You can walk into a new relationship while secretly expecting to be abandoned. You can start a new career while secretly believing you're not good enough. You can move to a new place while carrying the same fear, the same habits, and the same identity. The location changed. The circumstances changed. But the pattern came with you. That's why this next step matters. You have to learn how to notice the emotional state you're living from. Not just what you're thinking, but what you are constantly feeling. Are you making decisions from fear? From desperation? From scarcity? From the need to prove yourself? Or are you making them from clarity? From self-respect? From patience? From trust in your ability to handle whatever comes next? This doesn't mean pretending everything is perfect. It means refusing to let temporary emotions become permanent instructions. You can feel afraid and still move. You can feel uncertain and still choose. You can feel hurt and still refuse to become bitter. That is power, because your emotions are signals. They are not always commands. And once you understand that distinction, something begins to change. You stop saying, "I feel it, so it must be true." Instead, you start asking, "What is this feeling trying to show me?" That question creates distance between you and the reaction. And inside that distance, you find choice. Imagine you're standing in a huge room filled with thousands of doors. Every door represents a possible direction. Some lead toward old patterns. Some lead toward unfamiliar experiences. Some lead toward opportunities you haven't even imagined yet. But here's the problem. Your attention keeps turning toward the doors you already know. You keep opening the same ones. You keep walking through the same rooms. Then you wonder why your life keeps giving you the same lesson. Maybe it's repeating because you're being given another chance to respond differently. That's a completely different way to see your life. A repeated problem can become a repeated opportunity. If your response changes, the person who used to argue walks away. The person who used to chase lets go. The person who used to quit stays. The person who used to hide speaks. The situation may look similar, but the person inside the situation is different. And that difference matters. Because you don't need every circumstance to change before you change. Sometimes your change is what finally changes the circumstance. This is why you should pay attention to your smallest decisions. The moment you choose discipline over impulse, you are practicing a new identity. The moment you choose peace over proving yourself, you are practicing a new identity. The moment you choose your long-term future over temporary comfort, you are practicing a new identity. And repetition makes that identity stronger. Day by day, choice by choice, you begin building evidence. Evidence that you can trust yourself. Evidence that you can keep promises to yourself. Evidence that you can survive uncertainty. Evidence that you can leave what no longer serves you. And eventually, you stop needing constant reassurance. You become your own proof. That is when the shift becomes real. Not when everything around you suddenly becomes perfect, but when you no longer need perfect conditions to move forward. And here's something you may need to hear today. You are allowed to outgrow the version of yourself that other people remember. You are allowed to change your mind. You are allowed to choose differently. You are allowed to become unfamiliar to people who only knew your old identity. Because your future cannot be built entirely around keeping everyone comfortable with your past. Read that again in your mind. You don't owe your future to the person you had to be yesterday. Let that sink in. Because some people are not afraid of changing. They're afraid of being judged for changing. They're afraid someone will say, You're different now. And maybe the answer is yes. Maybe that's the point. You're supposed to be different. A seed does not betray itself by becoming a tree. A sunrise does not apologize for being brighter than the night. And you do not have to apologize for becoming more conscious of what you want. But there's a warning here. Don't confuse growth with running away. Don't use the idea of a new timeline to avoid responsibilities. Don't tell yourself that every difficult person must disappear. Don't assume every setback means you're on the wrong path. Sometimes growth means staying and learning. Sometimes it means leaving. Sometimes it means speaking. Sometimes it means staying silent. The real shift is learning to know the difference. And that requires something most people avoid. Stillness. Not endless thinking. Not scrolling for another answer. Not searching for someone to tell you what your life means. Just stillness. Because when everything becomes quiet, you can finally hear the questions you've been drowning out. What do I actually want? What am I afraid of? What am I pretending not to know? What am I holding on to because it is familiar? And perhaps the most important question, if I stopped being afraid of disappointing everyone else, what would I choose? Don't rush the answer. Let it come. Because sometimes the truth doesn't arrive loudly. Sometimes it appears as a quiet realization. I already know. And when you know, the next step becomes much easier to see. But seeing the path isn't enough. At some point, you have to walk it. And that's where the next shift begins. And when that happens, your future stops being an idea. It becomes a direction. And the next part is about exactly how to create that moment. There comes a moment when thinking is no longer enough. You can understand yourself. You can understand your patterns. You can understand what needs to change. But eventually, you have to act. Because intention without action is only a possibility. And this is where your new direction becomes real. Not tomorrow. Not someday. Now, take a breath. And think about one thing in your life that you already know you need to change. Don't choose 10 things. Choose one. One habit. One decision. One conversation. One boundary. One step you've been delaying. Now ask yourself, what would I do if I already trusted myself? Not if you were fearless. Not if you knew exactly how everything would end. Just, what would you do if you trusted yourself enough to take the next step? The answer may surprise you. Maybe you would finally start. Maybe you would finally stop. Maybe you would send the message. Maybe you would delete it. Maybe you would apply. Maybe you would leave. Maybe you would forgive. Maybe you would simply wake up tomorrow and stop repeating the same excuse. Whatever it is, you don't need to see the entire road. You only need to see the next step. That's something people forget when they talk about changing their lives. They imagine the future as one giant leap. But real change usually happens through small movements that become impossible to ignore. One morning becomes a new routine. One routine becomes a new habit. One habit becomes a new standard. One standard becomes a new identity. And eventually, your life looks different. Not because one magical moment changed everything, but because you stopped returning to the old version of yourself. This is why consistency is more powerful than intensity. Anyone can feel inspired for one night. Anyone can write a new goal. This time will be different. But the real shift happens when nobody is watching. When motivation disappears. When the excitement fades. When the old temptation returns. That's when you discover whether your decision was real. And if you fall back once, don't turn one mistake into an identity. You are not your worst day. You are not one bad decision. You are not the chapter you are trying to leave. Get up. Look again. Choose again. Continue. Because every time you return to the new direction, you strengthen it. And every time you stop feeding the old pattern, you weaken it. Think of your old identity like a path through a forest. You have walked it so many times that it became easy. You don't even need to think. Your feet know where to go. But when you stop using that path, it slowly becomes covered. Grass grows over it. Branches fall across it. The path doesn't disappear overnight, but it becomes less automatic. That's what happens inside you. Your old reactions can become less automatic. Your old fears can become less controlling. Your old habits can lose their grip, but only if you stop walking the same path. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Nobody can walk that path for you. People can encourage you. People can love you. People can give you advice. But the decision is yours. That is both the hardest part and the most empowering part. Because if the direction is yours, then the power to change direction is also yours. You don't need permission. You don't need everyone to understand. You don't need everyone to agree. You need clarity. And then you need courage. Courage doesn't mean you feel no fear. Courage means fear doesn't get the final vote. Remember this. The future changes when your next decision stops obeying your old fear. That is your moment. Not some distant cosmic event. Not a perfect day. Not the moment when every problem disappears. This moment. Right here. Because every day gives you hundreds of tiny crossroads. What will you focus on? What will you believe? What will you tolerate? What will you practice? What will you repeat? And each answer points somewhere. You may not see the destination yet, but you're moving. That's why you should stop obsessing over whether you've already reached your new life. Ask instead, am I moving in its direction? That's enough. You don't need proof every morning. You need alignment between what you say you want and what you repeatedly do. If you say you want peace, stop creating unnecessary chaos. If you say you want growth, stop protecting every old habit. If you say you want freedom, stop building your life around other people's approval. If you say you want a different future, stop rehearsing the same past. And no, this doesn't mean everything will suddenly become easy. There will still be setbacks. There will still be days when you doubt yourself. There will still be moments when the old identity knocks on the door. But now you know something you didn't know before. You don't have to answer. You can hear the knock and keep walking. That is what makes the difference. Because the old life may still call your name, but you don't have to go back. And once you understand that, you begin to experience something powerful. You begin noticing opportunities that were always there, but you were too distracted, afraid, or focused on the wrong direction to recognize them. A conversation, an idea, a person, a chance, a skill, a door. Something that once looked ordinary suddenly looks important. This is where people sometimes call it a sign. Maybe it is. Maybe it isn't. But what matters is that you are finally paying attention. And attention changes what you notice. What you notice influences what you choose. And what you choose shapes what comes next. That is the practical shift. Your timeline isn't something you need to chase. You create direction. Then you keep choosing it. Again, and again, and again, until the person who once dreamed about change becomes the person living it. But there is still one final piece. Because even after you make the decision, even after you begin walking, there is something that can quietly pull you back. Something stronger than a bad habit. Something deeper than motivation. Your attachment to the old story. And before you can truly move forward, you have to learn how to release the story that says you are still the person you used to be. Because your future cannot fully open while you are still emotionally living inside your past. There is something you need to release before you can fully step into what comes next. And it isn't your past. It's your attachment to the meaning you gave your past. Because what happened to you and what you decided it meant about you are not always the same thing. Maybe someone rejected you, and you decided you weren't enough. Maybe you failed, and you decided you were a failure. Maybe an opportunity disappeared, and you decided good things never happened for you. Maybe someone walked away, and you decided you would always be left behind. The event happened once, but the story kept happening inside your mind. That's the part you have to recognize. Your past can become a room you keep visiting long after the door has been opened. You replay the conversation. You replay the mistake. You replay what you should have said. You replay what you wish had happened. And every replay makes yesterday feel present. But yesterday is not asking you to live there. You are. So ask yourself, what would change if I stopped using my past as evidence against my future? Think about that. What if the mistake wasn't proof that you can't succeed? What if it was information? What if the rejection wasn't proof that you're unwanted? What if it simply meant that particular door wasn't yours? What if the ending wasn't proof that your story was over? What if it was the moment you finally stopped walking in the wrong direction? You don't have to pretend that the past didn't hurt. You don't have to call every painful experience a blessing. You don't have to force yourself to be positive. You simply have to stop giving the past unlimited authority over the future. That's different. You can remember something without obeying it. You can feel sadness without building your identity around it. You can remember who you were without becoming that person again. And this is where something quietly powerful happens. You begin separating, you stop saying, "This is who I am," and start saying, "This is what I experienced." That tiny change creates distance. Because an experience happened to you. But it does not have to become the definition of you. You are still here. Still learning. Still choosing. Still becoming. And if you're still becoming, then your story is not finished. Maybe that's why this stage of your life feels strange. You are no longer who you were, but you haven't fully met who you're becoming. That middle space can feel empty. It can feel lonely. It can feel like you're lost. But don't rush to escape it. The space between identities is often where transformation becomes possible. Think about a bridge. You leave one side, but for a while, you're standing in the middle. The old place is behind you. The new place is ahead. And the middle feels uncertain because you don't fully belong to either side anymore. That's okay. Keep walking. You don't need to turn around just because the destination isn't visible yet. And if you need a reminder, remember this. You are not behind. You are between versions of yourself. Let that line stay with you. Because maybe you're not failing. Maybe you're transitioning. Maybe the reason certain things no longer feel right is because you have changed. The conversations feel different. The goals feel different. The people you once chased no longer hold the same power. The things you once feared no longer seem worth sacrificing your peace for. That's not always loss. Sometimes, that's evidence of growth. And now comes another important shift. Stop asking, "How do I get back to who I was?" Ask, "What is trying to emerge now?" That question changes everything. Because your goal isn't to recover the old version of you. Your goal is to build a version of you that can handle the life you're asking for. If you want greater responsibility, become someone who can carry it. If you want deeper relationships, become someone who can communicate honestly. If you want freedom, become someone who can manage freedom. If you want peace, become someone who stops choosing chaos simply because it feels familiar. The future doesn't only require desire. It requires capacity. And capacity is built slowly, through practice, through failure, through uncomfortable decisions, through showing up when nobody is celebrating you. That's why you shouldn't be discouraged by the small steps. Small steps are training. Every time you keep a promise to yourself, you build trust. Every time you do something difficult without running away, you build courage. Every time you choose what matters over what is easy, you build discipline. And one day, you look back and realize something incredible. You didn't suddenly become stronger. You became stronger one decision at a time. That's the real shift. Not escaping your humanity, but becoming more intentional with it. So if you feel like you're standing at the edge of something, don't demand certainty. You may never get it. Instead, ask for enough courage to take the next step. Then take it. And when you reach the next step, take another. This is how an unknown future becomes a lived reality. Not through one perfect moment, but through continued movement. And now, I want you to do something simple. Close your eyes for a few seconds if you're somewhere safe. Take a slow breath. And imagine yourself 1 year from now. Don't imagine a perfect life. Imagine a more honest one. You wake up knowing what matters. You don't chase every distraction. You don't beg people to recognize your value. You don't spend every night wondering whether you're enough. You have problems, but you handle them differently. You have uncertainty, but you don't collapse under it. You have fear, but you keep moving. Look at that version of yourself. Then ask, what did you stop doing to become this person? Maybe the answer comes immediately. Maybe it doesn't. Either way, pay attention, because your future self doesn't need you to become perfect. It needs you to stop abandoning yourself. And that may be the most important part of this entire message. You don't need to find another universe. You need to stop leaving your own life every time it becomes uncomfortable. Stay, breathe, choose, move, again, and again, and again, because the future you're looking for may not require a completely different world. It may require a completely different relationship with the world you're already in. And once that relationship changes, your choices change. Your choices change. And your direction changes. Your direction changes. And eventually, your life changes. But there's one final question we still need to answer. How do you make this shift last when the excitement of this video disappears? Because inspiration fades. Motivation rises and falls. And tomorrow morning, your old life will still be waiting. So the final step isn't about feeling powerful tonight. It's about knowing exactly what to do when tomorrow feels ordinary again. And that's where everything becomes real. Tomorrow, this video will be over. The music will stop. The words will fade. And you will return to your normal day. That's exactly why this final part matters. Because a real shift doesn't happen while you're listening. It happens after you stop listening. When nobody is telling you what to think. When nobody is reminding you to stay focused. When life becomes ordinary again. That's where you find out whether something actually changed. So don't make a huge promise tonight. Don't say, from tomorrow, everything will be different. Instead, make one decision. One decision you can actually keep. Maybe you wake up 30 minutes earlier. Maybe you stop checking your phone first thing in the morning. Maybe you finally begin the project you've been delaying. Maybe you have the conversation you've been avoiding. Maybe you stop chasing someone who has already shown you they don't want to stay. Maybe you spend 1 hour each day building the skill that your future depends on. Choose one, then protect it. Because your future doesn't need another emotional promise. It needs evidence. Evidence that you can trust yourself. And here's something important. Don't wait until you feel motivated. Motivation is temporary. Build something that works even when motivation disappears. Create a simple rule. When you feel like quitting, take one more step. When you feel like going back, wait 24 hours before making the decision. When fear tells you that you're not ready, ask what the smallest possible action would be. When you make a mistake, correct it instead of creating a story about how you're a failure. Let them misunderstand. You don't need everyone to witness your transformation. Some of the most important changes in your life will happen quietly. Nobody will clap. Nobody will announce it. Nobody will know. But you'll know. You'll know the moment you respond differently. You'll know the moment you don't chase. You'll know the moment you keep your promise. You'll know the moment you choose peace instead of proving yourself. And those moments matter. Because identity is built privately before it becomes visible publicly. So stop looking for dramatic proof. Look for small evidence. The first morning you don't return to the old habit. That's evidence. The first time you say no without guilt. That's evidence. The first time you continue after failing. That's evidence. The first time you choose your future over temporary comfort. That's evidence. You are shifting. Not because some invisible force declared it, but because your choices are different. And your choices matter. Now take one more breath. And listen carefully. You don't need to know exactly where your life will be 1 year from now. You don't need the entire map. You don't need every answer. You don't need certainty. You need direction. A compass doesn't show you the entire road. It simply tells you which way is north. Your values can become that compass. Your purpose can become that compass. Your honesty can become that compass. And when you get lost, return to them. When you feel pressure, return to them. When someone tries to pull you back into an old version of yourself, return to them. When the future feels uncertain, return to them. Because the goal isn't to control every event. The goal is to become someone who can meet whatever happens without abandoning yourself. That is a deeper kind of freedom. And maybe you've been waiting for a sign that your life is about to change. So here is your sign. Not that everything will magically become easy. Not that every dream will happen exactly as you imagined. But that you can choose differently today. And sometimes, that is where everything begins. You were never required to become perfect. You were never required to have every answer. You were never required to know exactly how the story ends. You only needed enough courage to write the next line. So write it. Take the step. Make the call. Start the work. Set the boundary. Forgive yourself. Let go. Begin again. Whatever your next honest step is, take it. Because the timeline you keep imagining is not built somewhere far away. It is built in the ordinary decisions you make when nobody is watching. And if you forget everything else from this video, remember this. Your future does not begin when everything changes. Your future begins when you do. That's the shift. Not fantasy. Not escape. Not pretending. Choice. Awareness. Action. Again and again. And maybe tomorrow will look exactly the same when you wake up. The same room. The same responsibilities. The same problems. The same world. But you can wake up with a different decision. And sometimes that's enough to begin a completely different direction. So take one final breath. Look at where you are. Look at where you've been. Then look forward. You don't have to run. You don't have to prove anything. You don't have to know every step. Just move toward the life that feels honest. One choice. One day. One step at a time. And when the old version of you asks you to come back, smile. Thank that version for getting you here. And keep walking. Because the door behind you does not have to stay open. The road ahead does not have to be fully visible. You only need enough light to see the next step. Take it, and then take another. This is where the shift becomes yours.